For the life of me, I cannot get this character out of my mind. I've always been an enjoyer of various weapon types and gameplay. For example, if there was a playable character that was fast with the scythe, all of my clothes would immediately fall off. The other two archetypes that I like are dual blade characters and bow characters. And believe me, I'm tired of spamming X. Aside from that, being in melee range for some bosses is pretty tough, and so when Song was announced as playable, it was so Jover for me. But I've been looking at some of the footage of her, and I noticed some interesting things. So today, I wanted to take a deep dive into TWEYEN's kit and what we know about it based off of the original Granblue game and the footage that we got on the past livestream. Yeah, I could wait for this next livestream, but I'm impatient. My name is Brax, and let's get into the video. First off, in the original Granblue game, TWEYEN, or Song, does a few things. Most of her kit revolves around buffs and debuffs. For example, in the base game, one of her abilities called Merculite gives her an increase in skill damage cap, attack, and gives her dodge all moves for one hit. Her next ability, Depravity, inflicts a ridiculous amount of debuffs. In fact, it's so insane, I'm just gonna read them to you. Reduces debuff resistance by 10%, applies poison, burn, putrefied, blinded, charmed, zombified, sleep, paralyzed, 25% attack down, 25% defense down, 50% DA down, I don't know what that is, 50% TA down, I don't know what that is either, and applies lethal hit to all enemies. Lethal hit just allows you to insta-kill them. It's kind of insane. That's all from one ability. So clearly, a lot of her damage is going to come from dots, and she's going to be more of a supporting unit. Unless she's a supporting unit that just does a ridiculous amount of damage too. Now, one thing that she does in the original Granblue is that she has charged attacks. These charged attacks seem to do a lot more damage, and at higher levels, they do hit most of the enemies, if not all of them. Because Granblue Fantasy Relink is a game that allows you to target specific enemies, and because it's in a 3D space, it's pretty safe to say that TWEYEN will have a charged attack. In fact, if you look at the stream, you can see that she does charge up a few attacks. In the OG Granblue game, she has an ability called Clincher. Basically, after you've landed a charged attack, when you charge attack enemies, you gain a buff called Gain the Thunder, and when you use Clincher with that buff, it consumes the buff and paralyzes enemies. This seems like a perfect skill to add into Granblue Fantasy Relink because we already have paralysis, and it would be a cool mechanic to work around with her kit. The other thing with Clincher is that it deals more damage the more debuffs enemies have. There's only a couple more abilities that are listed on the wiki for the character. One of them is an extension of debuffs that TWEYEN applies just to keep the timer up, and the damage scales on the amount of debuffs enemies have, just like Clincher. There's also addendums to her charged attack that basically buff your teammates whenever she lands one, and I think that would be a really cool mechanic if she had some sort of charged attack in Relink that buffed your teammates crit. One last thing I didn't talk about yet is this one debuff that she applies with Clincher called Pinpoint Prey, which effectively shreds enemy defense and also grants an increase to the amount of damage you deal to enemies. I would imagine that this is going to end up just being supplementary damage in Granblue Fantasy Relink. At least that's how I would implement it, but they also have the opportunity to basically make it a vulnerability stack that just increases the damage enemies take. Now, you might be wondering at this point why I'm even talking about the OG game. Well, historically, they've taken things directly from the OG game, but also, if you look at the live stream, she's using exactly the abilities we're talking about. I mean, she literally says Clincher and then hits enemies really, really hard and paralyzes them. I feel like it's pretty indicative, right? Based off of her OG Granblue kit, I think it's pretty safe to say that she's going to do a few of these things. As you can see from the footage, she has Clincher. Clincher is going to allow her to paralyze, which I would imagine she is able to do after she does a charged attack. On top of that, you can also see the ability in Relink that applies a ton of debuffs to enemies. Now, the thing with Relink is it's a little bit different because the debuffs that you're actually applying in Relink can't be exactly the same as the ones in the OG Gacha game. At least to my knowledge, from what we're seeing, it doesn't look like the effect Lethal Hit is getting applied, and some of these just don't exist, like Charmed, for example. But as you can see, she applies a ton of dots and a ton of debuffs to enemies, and those debuffs are going to come in so clutch, one, for shredding enemies, and two, if you have massive skill issue and are getting beat up by a boss, I guess attack down on them is kind of nice. Not that that really matters a ton for Lucilius, since you're going to get one shot anyways. Now, going back to the ability Merculite, that was one that I can't confirm was in the footage, but I can imagine they would put it in the game. The reason is because we already have abilities that grant you one free dodge without having to try at all. Like, you have Mirror Image on Lancelot, and on the really short dude with the swords and the mustache, he also gives your entire team basically immunity to a couple hits. So it makes sense if TWEYEN or Song was able to apply that same effect to herself. It would also be very cool if she could apply attack up to herself and or all allies, and it's not the only instance we've seen of something like that, so I definitely think that's going to be in the game. Quite frankly, I think we can assume that most of these abilities are in the game. TWEYEN has a mass debuffing ability, she has has a paralyze, she has charged attacks, and I would imagine that because she has some abilities that are based on the amount of debuffs that enemies have on them, those are probably ones that she's going to have in Relink as well. Now, what I'm curious about is what other abilities is she going to actually have? Because as you may know, characters don't just have 4 abilities. They might have 4 abilities active, but there's definitely more slots and more room for abilities. Some characters have 8, and I think Zeta even has 9. So they're gonna have to come up with some things that aren't in her base kit. Truth be told, I'm not super knowledgeable in the OG Granblue game, so there could be things that I missed. But all in all, it looks like TWEYEN is going to pose as a sort of supporting character that dishes out a ton of damage based off of her own kit stacking, using debuffs and charged attacks, and like, I really cannot wait for her. She looks like she's going to be a monster in AoE, but seeing as Cygames has balanced, attempted to rebound, honestly, I'm not even gonna, it was bad. It was really bad. But it seems like they care about the balance of the game, so I doubt she's going to be bad in single target. It does look like she's going to excel at AoE, which is cool. And with that mobility we sort of saw on screen, and the fact that she's a ranged character and she's not going to have to be up close and personal with bosses, you can basically assume, as long as she's not the worst damage dealer in the game, she's going to be pretty rewarding to play, specifically because you don't have to be up close and personal with the bosses, and if the bosses teleport away from you, you're not entirely fucking doomed, unlike every melee character in the entire Lucilius fight. Anyways, when I looked at the OG kit and I looked at the footage of TWEYEN, I just got way too stoked. She's clearly got some mobility, some AoE, a charged attack with multiple volleys. She's got aerial combos as she should, she's a queen. Group paralysis, endless volleys of debuffs. And her Skybound art looks so damn good. It even has that black and white impact frame that Narmaya has. Anyways, let me know what you guys think of TWEYEN or Song. I'm really not sure what I'm supposed to call her at this point. I kind of feel like I'm Granblue Fantasy's Gen Alpha, like I'm just so late. And I will catch you guys in the next video.